So remember that psychologists as a scientist try to work to falsify a theory by continuous empirical testing. This means we need to collect evidence, and evidence needs to be strong. So how we are going to collect strong and valid evidence? Even though psychologists work on a theory typically about some mental events that's not directly observable, in order to make psychology as a science, our evidence needs to be something that can be directly observable. This is where this concept of operationalization or operationalizing comes into play. So memory performance must be something that's observable, even though the memory itself is not observable. So that's where operationalization comes in. So the number of items that one can recall under some circumstance is observable and can be verified. So that's an operationalization by which memory is measured. So in this slide, I'm describing the benefit of operationalization. This means exactly how operationalization contributes to our scientific approach of doing research in psychology. So please read each ideas that's described in this slide carefully. So in this slide, I'm further getting into the details of how the idea of operationalization work by kind of dissecting almost mathematically and mechanistically this process of operationalization. So as you can read this, so your hypothesis and idea. Idea is composed of concepts, and here are some examples that I'm talking about, like difficulty of understanding a sentence, which is concept, which is influenced by feature of a sentence, that's a concept too. So in operationalizing, you're going to operationalize, translate these concepts into concrete variable which can be measured. For example, difficulty of understanding a sentence needs to be operationalized by some specific measure, which we are going to talk about. Also, features of the sentence needs to be specifically operationalized using the measurable variable. So in this slide, we talk about different ways of operationalizing concept by translating into concrete value, observable variable. So on the one hand, people prefer quantitative variable, such as, for example, people's reaction time can be 200 milliseconds versus 300 milliseconds. Obviously, 200 milliseconds are faster than 300 milliseconds. However, sometimes, even though we prefer quantitative variables, it can be misleading in the sense it's oversimplified. So let's think about lab. So let's say one lab's, for example, one's kind of positive rating of lab of psychology. Let's think about lab of psychology. One's lab of psychology may be 2, the other person's lab of psychology is 3, and then yet another person's lab of psychology is 4. So this means 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 is the one increment difference, so that's treated as an interval. But is 2 and difference between 2 and 3 is the same as 3 and 4? It's very unclear, because the reason why I'm talking about this is you need to be careful that often the psychological concepts that you are interested in is not one-dimensional, unidimensional. It's multi-dimensional and it's complicated and different in multiple ways. So even though the lesson here is, even though we prefer quantitative variables, there is a danger into over-relying on quantitative variables or operationalization, because that may be oversimplifying it. I hope this makes sense to you. I hope you recall from statistics that we have different kinds of measurement scales, such as nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Interval and ratio is a quantitative measure, whereas nominal and ordinal is a qualitative measure. And as such, depends on how you operationalize. It results in your concept eventually results in either quantitative or qualitative variable. And so you need to be aware of the benefit and limitation of each of these measurement scale when you create the variable through operationalization. So here in this slide, we are going to talk about a specific example of operationalization to create something called operational definition. So we use this example, difficulty of understanding a sentence. So this is a hypothetical mental state. Everybody believes in a common sense that the difficulty that you feel at the time of understanding a sentence is real. However, in order to investigate scientifically this phenomenon, you need to translate this into some measurable variable. That's the operational definition. So I'm giving you 4 different examples. Number 1, eye movement. So the type of eye movement, and then how fast or how long or how much your eye moves can be understood as one form of operationalization of difficulty. Reading time, the longer the reading time, probably it's more difficult. And brain activity, if you know which area of the brain is involved in what kind of processing, and obviously ability to answer question based on the sentences. Okay? And so the key is it's not just operationalization, but you need to be explained theoretically why this operationalization makes sense to represent difficulty of understanding a sentence in concrete terms. In operationalizing a concept into a specific variable, another distinction or criteria I would like you to consider is whether the measurement or operationalization is online versus offline. Online means measurement happens as the process unfolds, whereas offline means a measurement happens after the target process happens. For example, when you are actually measuring the brain activity, at the time the person is reading a sentence about which you are interested in, then the difficulty of reading the sentence is measured online because it's a simultaneous brain activity. Whereas if you're relying on, let's say, comprehension test that's given after reading the sentence, that's offline because that happens after some time following the target processes. And the common sense is online measure is more accurate because the reason is less time is elapsed, therefore a less room for error. But on the other hand, one thing that you need to be careful about is if it's an online measure, it could be intrusive, therefore it may be influencing the activity of the process itself, even though it's introducing less error in terms of measurement. And that's an important issue you need to consider. As you may have become aware by now, you need to understand there are multiple ways of operationalizing the same concept. So this entails that the decision of how to operationalize the concept in your research needs to be based on some careful consideration. So there are 2 things that I will actually bring up. Number 1 is it needs to be obviously based on your research question and a goal. What do you want to know? Okay? And then number 2, obviously you need to have a skill and a knowledge about specific operationalization. Even though based on online, offline consideration, the brain activity may be superior to comprehension tests. In order to understand the meaning of the brain activity as measured by fMRI, you need to have a considerable knowledge on the brain as well as the instrument itself. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about in here. So here I'm listing some potential concept that you may be interested in psychology that needs to be operationalized. So the top is a visual perception and the bottom is spirituality. I want you to think about a potential operationalization of all these different kinds of psychological construct or concept. And as you may notice, uh, compared to the first one, like a visual perception, spirituality is a much more complicated construct, and it may lead to different kinds of operationalization depending on your research interest. So let's think about love, for example. That's fairly complicated concept. I'd say, based on my common sense understanding, love may involve one's desire to be with somebody else, or one's desire to actually devote yourself for uh, the benefit of others. And these things, two different kinds of operationalization, like for example, one's willingness to die for the other person, or one's desire to be with other person as long as possible. These two different kinds of operationalization may result in different kinds of finding. Then it comes to generate a question: which of these operationalization may be is more accurate or correct or appropriate? So under some circumstance, this conflict or contradiction of the finding or inconsistency of the finding based on different operationalization may lead to further differentiated understanding of love, which may require to split or divide the different concepts of love. So this is how actually science evolved. The people's understanding of love initially may be folk psychological, but as a result of continuous investigation based on different operationalization, it leads to more sophisticated understanding. So as we discussed in the previous slide, so operationalization is very important, in particular in psychology, because many concepts that we work with or we are interested in are very abstract and it's not directly observable. And also, the beginning stage of the investigation relies on folk psychological concepts of these ideas such as motivation, love, spirituality. Well, as we progress in investigation using this technique of concepts of operationalization, it actually starts revealing that these concepts that you initially thought to be pretty straightforward is much more complicated, and there may be multiple different kinds of concepts. That's how science advances. And so we will talk about these issues further when we talk about the measurement and in relation to validity, especially.